Hi everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to this video. I thought that this morning I would go over some opening lines that I play, partially for my own benefit, kind of for posterity, so I can see what I did in the past and how I want to maybe change my opening repertoire in the future, but also just so people who watch the video can get a sense for some openings that you can play. So I want to start with, for this video, some openings for black. We'll see how far we get. So I'm going to flip the board. So let's start out with e4. So for the vast majority of my chess playing life, I've played e6, the French defense. So now after d4, d5, you have the main starting position of the French defense. So here the main line is knight c3. And to which I've usually played knight f6. So after knight f6, there are a couple options. They can play this, which is Steinman's variation here, and then usually f4, c5, getting in that thematic French defense break. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, and now either a6, looking to immediately play on the queen side with b5. You can actually get pretty crazy positions with this line, like for example here. Queen b6, queen d2, and then I think g5 is actually a line. Morozevich likes to play this. Basically the idea is whichever piece takes here, you're going to have some counterplay against these two pawns. So that's a line. You can also just keep building up and developing with like bishop e7, bishop b7. So heading back, here. Oh yes, the other move here, instead of a6, is just developing first here, like queen d2, castles. So first developing the king side, then deciding between action with f6 and a6, b5. So it's a little more flexible. So I've played both of these lines. Both are good. A small side note, if white decides to do without the move f4, you can play this in kind of a Nimzovichian style, so forfeiting the center to create a blockade here. Takes, captures. Now black interpolates this move right here, knight c6, attacking this pawn, which is defended by bishop f4. Then captures this pawn with the bishop. Now bishop at d3. And now, in this, I remember I had a club game. This line got played against me by a very strong player. He was a master player, and I played the blunder castles in this position. After which, white is really perfectly poised for the classic bishop takes h7 sacrifice. So here, actually, black's is best to just try to hang on after king h7, sorry, king h8. Of course, the position is much worse here as well. In the game, I actually lost very quickly. So I saw that here, if I retreat here, then that's a quick loss after here. Mate's threatened, so you have to do something like this, but then that's just kind of miserable. Yeah, just not a great position. I think it actually even leads to mate here.
Check.
And that looks like mate. Yeah. So I saw that entire line, and so I figured I'd better take this chance, which sometimes works, but in this position it just is also quickly failing to queen d3. And now the question is, where do I move? If I move here, I instantly lose the queen, although probably also get mated. So if I move here, then I can just take here, winning the queen. Moved here, then just here, here, and this is mate. So got crushed in that game. That was a long tangent, basically to say that you can't play castles in this position and instead have to play h6. And now after pawn takes, either knight takes or queen takes is actually possible. Basically the battle is going to be whether white can restrain the center and put pressure on it, or whether black can advance these pawns, because if black can advance these pawns, it's going to stand better. Black also has potential to put pressure down this f file here. So it's a playable position, definitely. So back to here, the other move is bishop here. Now, when I first started playing this variation, I played bishop e7, and this got kind of boring, to be honest. The main line is something like here, takes, f4. Now, whereas in the Steinitz variation, you can just play this immediately, in this variation, you have to insert a6 before you play c5, because since the dark square bishops have been traded off, c5 immediately is met by knight here with the fork threatened and knight d6 also. So that's not good. So a6, c5, and then just like the normal development, knight c6, castles. So I don't know, it's kind of, because the dark square bishops have been traded off, that's a theoretically good exchange from white's point of view, because white's bad bishop and black's good bishop, but also because black is lacking the space, it makes the position less cramped for black to trade off a set of minor pieces like that. So playable, not that interesting. I've played this variation before with white, with the idea that after bishop e7 here, knight here, I actually would play h4, which is, I think, Alekhine gambit. I could be getting that wrong. Basically, the idea is that, okay, white can win a pawn here, but that's going to be compensated for by this open h file for the rook, and also the gaining of time on the queen, probably by knight h3, but sometimes by knight f3. So, and the idea is that if the gambit is declined, like if you don't take that bishop, then the move h4 is going to be useful anyway, because you're going to want to attack on the king side, potentially. And this h pawn is going to want to be in the mix in any case. So I played this before. Whoops, I played this before as white. Of course, the main line is just to capture. So I've started playing the more dynamic McCutcheon variation recently. It's a little bit more in the spirit of the Winterer variation of the French, which I'll go over in a minute. The idea is that e5, h6, and now it looks for a second like black can win a pawn, takes, and then takes this pawn down here on g7. But that's just really temporary. Like this position after captures, rook here, and then like queen f6 takes g7 is actually completely harmless for black. So that's no good. So bishop retreats. You can play this gambit line here, bishop e3, planning to give up this pawn here, because after like knight here, there's no decent way to defend that pawn, really. So you're planning to just give it up for fast development, basically. So you can play that. Main line is bishop e2, after which takes. There's a neat little line here. So pawn really has to take, because you want to A, support your d4 point directly with the pawn, and B, your bishop wants to stay pointing towards black's king side, because that's where your good prospects are going to come, is the king side attack. So a cool line, if white avoids the doubling of his pawns, Bishop takes c3, c5. Oh wait, sorry, I'm messing up the order. Here, and now c5 works. It's successful because after d takes c5, then black has a tactical shot. Knight takes f7, or sorry, f2. I'm really messing up the notation here because
check.
Queen h4 check picks up the bishop here. So that doesn't really work out. So b takes, still knight e4. Now you play, or king g4 gets played. And now this is a crossroads. Black can either play a little bit slower, king f8, which is what I've played, which looks absolutely strange, but of course black can't castle because then bishop takes h6. So king f8 looks a bit strange, but the idea is that your king is actually, like this defensive setup, king f8 and then rook defending the pawn on g7 when it gets attacked. Because it's going to get attacked because h4, rook h3, rook g3. It's going to get attacked that way, probably. So then you can just defend it with rook g8. This setup is actually not bad. Of course, the drawback is that your rook is a little bit slower to get into play. Often after the attack has dissipated, a few pieces traded off, the king will actually go back to like e7 or d7 so this rook can get into play. So it's a little funky line. This is the one I usually play. And the other way you can defend that pawn is by playing g6, of course. Which has the disadvantage of weakening the dark squares, but has the advantage of that it's like a little bit quicker with that rook. You're probably going to play h5 at some point, hitting the queen, and then you get this structure here where you weaken the dark squares, but if you defend well, it's maybe not an issue. h5 is in response to h4, by the way. You would never play h5 before they played h4. It's a little note. So in either of these cases, the strategy is always going to be to play c5, knight c6. This knight will end up getting traded off for this bishop at d2. King will take. So in this line, actually neither king castle. It's interesting. So c5, and then the knight will get traded off for the bishop. c5, knight c6, and then c4 to hit away this bishop, which probably developed to d3, because if you don't do that, then the attack is really going to be deadly. Meanwhile, queen is swinging over to put pressure on like c3, a2. You're trying to get this b5, b4 push in. That's important. So basically, you're looking for play on the queen side. Where white's looking for play on the king side, he's going to play h4. Rook swings out. You know, maybe any number of kingside attacking moves. So it's an interesting line. It's one I play, and some of them still do play. So that's those variations. Now let's look at briefly the winner variation. Bishop here. Now, this is a little bit more unbalanced, let's say, in the position in the classical line after knight f6. So there are these sidelines like knight e2, where actually playing with knight c6 becomes more effective than before because of this knight setup. So I've actually played this line before. Normally, playing out knight c6 in front of your c-pawn is like sacrilegious when you're playing the French defense because you almost always want to play c5, but in this case it can actually be effective. So there are some small sidelines. There's this variation, which is like a delayed exchange variation. It's kind of annoying. But the main line, of course, is push. So because this pawn was attacked because of the pin. So you just get that out of the way of the attack. Whoops. Gain space. Now c5, that classic French break. a3.
Check.
Takes. knight e7. Now queen g4. And this is the main line winner. Knight f3 isn't really great. It looks like a really natural developing move, and it definitely has been played. But just normal developing moves, it doesn't really capture the essence of the position, which is that because of the exchange of the dark square bishop, black's king side is weak. So you really should go after that. If you don't, then white will just have good counterplay against these queenside pawns. So queen g4, and now you can play castles, which I've played briefly, but I don't know. I think the more exciting way to play and the more dynamic way to play is queen c7, the infamous poison pawn variation. So after a long sequence of forced moves, not forced, but queen takes g7, rook g8, queen takes here. Takes this pawn. Knight here. I hope I'm getting this line right. I sometimes mess up the move order. Takes here. Trying to think. Oops. Something like this, okay? And I'm sorry, I might have mixed up a couple of those moves, but you get to this position, basically. And from here, there are a couple of moves that you can play. So basically, material is actually even right now, but white's, of course, going to win this pawn here. So there are a couple moves. There is d4, which is a very interesting line. A lot of these lines are very tactical, so I'm hesitant to go into them because I don't want to. I haven't really prepped for this video. I meant it just as like an overview of some of the lines I played in the French. And I don't get something wrong on video. So d4 is a line. Knight f5 is a line that Simon Williams plays, and the classical line is bishop d7, just trying to pile up on this, getting counterplay on the c file as quickly as possible. So what does black have in compensation for this pawn that he's going to give up? Has pressure down the g file, lots of pressure down the c file, and better development, basically. So definitely some compensation there. What are white's plans? Well, just to kind of consolidate, take this pawn. This h pawn is passed, so that's a big trump card for white. If you can just, one plan is just to kind of roll that down the board if it's possible. So yeah, it's a pretty cool line, I think. Very rich play. So that's the poison pawn variation of the winner,
check,
which is what I'm starting to play now because I'm trying to play more dynamic continuations. So all of that is for the classical French, and now you have some other lines. So I'm just going to go through them quickly. Advance. You play c5. To c3. Just a side note, a lot of people at the club level will play knight c3. I mean knight f3, sorry. But this is just not really good. You can just take it. If queen takes, you of course hit the queen, but knight takes, and now you can play just knight c6. It's almost always bad when you surrender like this d4 point in the French as white this early. This structure is just, black's already equalized out of the opening and maybe even has chances to kind of like, because if this d4 pawn, sorry, this e5 pawn gets pressured at all, that can cause white some serious headaches. So That's not good. So c3 is necessary, of course. Knight c6, knight f3. Now I've always liked bishop d7, because the idea is that like queen b6 is another line just like piling up on this pawn. But the idea behind bishop d7 is that the bishop is almost always going to develop to d7. The queen doesn't necessarily have to go to b6. You can go to c7 or a5 in some cases. So just want a little bit more flexibility with that queen. Bishop b7. So now if bishop d3, which actually interferes with the queen's defense of this pawn, now you can play captures, captures, queen b6. And this is awkward. So in order to defend this pawn, you either have to make this really awkward move, bishop e3. Actually, you can't even make that because I just take this pawn here. So basically, you can't effectively defend that pawn. You could retreat bishop e2, but then you've just lost the tempo, because why didn't you just develop e2 to start out? So what most people do is actually sack the pawn here with like something like this. Whoops, wrong piece. I'm not sure if I'm getting that line exactly right. Actually, I know I'm not getting the line exactly right because white normally doesn't surrender the pawn on e5 as well. Although that is actually a line that you can play, the double pawn sacrifice, which is really insane. But white usually sacrifices this pawn in this case. So the normal line is bishop e2, so keeping the queen defending that point. And now there are a couple ways you can play. When I started out playing this line, I just played the natural developing move, knight e7. Just kind of pushing the ball back on the court. So castles. And now there are a few moves. There's knight g6. There's rook b8. Or sorry, rook c8. That's what I meant. I usually played rook c8. Kind of the same idea, just kind of waiting. Because depending on where this bishop is going to develop, you might want to put the knight on f5 or g6. So keep that knight flexible. Note that if this pawn is ever taken, it's not a problem. You just play knight g6, and one of those pawns is going to hang, and you actually have a good position. Because again, white's surrendered this d4 point. So I played this a slower way. You can also play. Whoops. You can also play a little bit more aggressively with f6. So the idea is this, basically. At some point, so if white captures here, you should just retake the knight. In this position is, typical French defense when the f6 break has been accomplished. So you got to watch out for this e6 pawn, but you've dissolved a bit of white center, so that's an accomplishment. What you can actually do is, there's another plan, which is basically close the center with c4. And now the situation is a little different because this side is actually closed. So you can actually, when this trade occurs, you can actually take the g pawn. Now you have the open g file. This is presumably once white's already castled, by the way. Let's put that move in. You can actually get up a serious initiative on the king side if they take, and you take with a pawn. Because you can actually close up the queen side, then castle on that wing, and then go for a king side attack. So that's obviously a much riskier way to play this variation, but kind of fun. You can also just content yourself with the fact that you've damaged their center like this. When you can take and they have to take with their pawn again because they're surrendering that d4 point, this is usually good. And you always have the open f file no matter what with that f6 break. So that's what I've started playing more recently. And the advance. There's the exchange. I won't go over it for too long because it's just the most boring variation of the French. Typical way to play is this. you can actually recapture the queen. I've played this on occasion because I've also played the Scandinavian, and this is basically like transposing into a Scandinavian, an inferior version of the Scandinavian because this bishop is blocked in. But if you can get like, let's just look at, so like queen d6, or actually queen d8 also in this position. Queen d6 here. And now actually if you can get this sort of development scheme, just gonna, if you can get this in, bishop develops to b7, this can be decent, you know, just bishop e7, bishop b7, knight bd7, castles, and looking for c5. That can be a good setup if they just play passively and you achieve that. That's nice. So I played that sometimes just to keep the pawn structure in balance, because of course here this is just not a very principled move. Like, you take away the one disadvantage of the French, which is that this bishop is usually blocked in, so you just give it free reign basically. So like knight f3, in order to play interesting positions, I've played the queenside castling line before, a lot actually, where basically you don't develop this knight to f6, you develop it to e7, and the reason you develop it to e7 after bishop e6, so bishop e6, bishop d6, knight e7, and that way when you have the knight, the bishop here, let me just put some moves in, I don't know, I'm just going to put in some moves. Knight e7, advantages here, this bishop pin, which is normally very appealing when the knight's on f6, could just be met by f6 because you're not castling kingside, so this weakening doesn't really matter. Like, oftentimes they will retreat to h4 because your opponent won't think they're not going to want to weaken, but you just do weaken, and then you're going to castle queenside. The other idea behind this knight development is that you can play like bishop here, trading off the light squared bishops, which is on principle a good decision for black because it's the bad bishop, and the light squared bishop is white's strongest piece. So that's nice too. And then you play queenside castle with like knight d7, c6, queen c7, queenside castle, and then march those kingside pawns, and it turns into an opposite size castling game, where black is probably objectively slightly worse, just because it's kind of a little bit easier to attack the queenside in some cases, but nothing to mean, not a big enough difference to mean much, you know. It's the typical hack and attack, and if you can do that, then you'll do well in this. The other thing I played is c5, trying to play that isolated queen's pawn position after like this exchange. You can have the isolated queen's pawn, but you can have all the dynamic possibilities that come with that. So that's the exchange. So now we move on to the last variation that I'm going to cover today, the Tirage. Here I've played a lot of different moves. I played the c5 line. This turns into like a mix between, I think, a French and a Scandinavian, really. Because oftentimes this queen does come out here and recaptures, and black will momentarily gain a pawn on d4. Like, I don't know. I already forgot this line. Like this. I forget this line. It's been so long since I've played it. But the queen will often recapture and black will momentarily win this pawn, but then like knight b3 takes it back. And so you get kind of, you know, a calmer position, I think. The queen retreats back to d6, and when it's hit by bishop c4, it's a calmer position. Knight f6, whoops. Knight f6 is a little more fighting, I think. Here, here, here. This is the main line. Now, what usually plays, what usually plays knight e2, so this knight can come here. Knight takes, f6, takes, knight here, here, castles. And now either castles or queen c7. Queen c7, the idea being to block this bishop f4 because of castles, whoops, because of castles, bishop f4 is a theoretically good exchange because it gains a little bit more control of the square. So the ideas here are obviously for white, this pole and this backward pawn are targets. For black, there can be kingside attacking prospects. Often in the Tarrasch, not so much in this variation, but there are lines when white plays f4, and so these two pawns are maintained here. Here, at least, black has chipped away at one of white's center pawns, but when these two pawns are maintained here, often there'll be sacrifice ideas, giving up a piece for those two pawns and some dynamic activity. Even in this position, like even in this type of game, there are often like exchange sack ideas where you sack the rook for the knight on f3. That's often like a way to get things going. That's often kind of compulsory in these lines. Often, there's also the idea to activate this bishop like that once black is castled and everything. And there's the idea to put pressure on this pawn. So those are the ideas. I've also played this interesting move here. Bishop e7. This is a waiting move, and there are also other ways to play this strategy, like you can play a6. Basically trying to wait until white shows his cards a little bit, like by putting this knight on f3, for example. That would be showing the cards, because now the knight e2, f3 setup here is no longer possible. So bishop e7, for example, if knight f3, now you would play here. And now this is an entirely different setup. So bishop d3, here, 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 castles. And now, in this position, there are different moves you can play. You can play captures and then like followed by queen b6, trying to put pressure on this pawn. Or you can actually sacrifice this pawn to get a good game, if that occurs. What I like to play is this really crazy line g5 here. Pretty dynamic, seeking just to like straight up undermine this knight by pushing here and then undermine this point here. So it's usually captures the response here, bishop c2. And it's just a very interesting position. Now black's going to try to put pressure on this pawn, maybe even will attack on the king side. Obviously the king is like a bit more area than if black had just decided to castle king side, play queen b6, play that plan. But it's pretty cool and dynamic. And it's a whole different setup because it's not the knight e2 f3 setup. So a nice move in this position for white is e5. I found this kind of annoying because now this knight square is taken away. And normally it would develop to e7, and this bishop would wait to develop, but now it's kind of blocked. So I actually stopped playing this line because of this e5 line I found annoying. So black plays c5, c3, and like, you get a type of position, in fact, you get a position where, oops, maybe I did this slightly wrong. So here, maybe here even. So you get the same position where white has knights here and here. Bishop comes to here. Maybe white doesn't get this ideal setup with the knights, but if he doesn't, then he gets f4 in. f4. So white still gets that nice tirage, like stable tirage center. Um, and then black usually plays f6 at some point. And after capture, you have a position that's similar to the one that we looked at the first line, except black's bishop is on e7 instead of d6. And it's more active on d6. So I was annoyed by this line, so that's why I stopped playing this line, started playing the f6. Oops, f6. So, in short, it's a pretty cool opening in the French defense. Some people think it's really boring. I don't know. It's like a play for a draw type opening. I don't know. I mean, personally, as black, I look to play the more dynamic lines, like the poison pawn of the Windward. That's a really dynamic line. And the McCutcheon variation with bishop b4. McCutcheon variation is a quick reminder. This one right here. That's dynamic. Or the dynamic ways of playing the advance and the exchange Frenches with opposite sides castling and then playing that attack. The dynamic way of playing the tirage, where you get those positional weaknesses, but you have the f-file and you have definitely counter chances in lots of areas of the board. So, I don't know, of course you can play calmer lines in the French too. That's kind of what I like about it too. Like if, let's say, I was in a tournament situation where I needed to draw, maybe I wouldn't play the McCutcheon variation. Maybe instead I would play, this line. Bishop here, here. A little bit calmer. Or like same thing with the tirage. Maybe I would play c5. A little bit calmer if you know the theory. But in short, I think it's like a really interesting opening complex. It's really fascinating. I played it for a long time, so I developed kind of some game experience with it. And it served me really well, so I think that's all I'm going to do for this video. Sorry it took so long. I was not expecting to go over openings for that long just based on one opening, but I will follow up with more videos on different openings. So hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.